Zapraszamy do sali już na następną prelekcję pani Barbary Serbinski Sipe. Kto z Państwa nie zna języka angielskiego, to prosimy zaopatrzyć się jeszcze w recepcji w tłumacza. Sprzęt do tłumaczenia. Jeżeli już wszyscy są gotowi, to oddaję głos pani Barbarze.
Dziękuję bardzo. Cześć. Nazywam się Basia Serbinska-Sipe. Jestem ze Stanów Zjednoczonych. Dzisiaj przedstawię Państwu moją książkę Listy z pudełka na strychu. Książka jest o wspomnieniu mojej matce i jej doświadczenia podczas II wojny światowej i brutalności radzieckich Rosjan. This book, a story about my mother and family.
Książka o mojej mamie i jej rodzinie jest tak jak większość waszych historii.
This weekend to remember, discuss and learn more about families from the Kresy and the horrors they went through World War II on this year's 80th anniversary of the war's start and losing the Kresy to the Soviets.
Na rzecz Sowietów.
Stanisława Emilia Krasowska.
The first picture shows her as a grandmother, and the second picture is her portraying her as her mom.
Kosovo when it was in Poland. The area south of Stanisławów is where Polish Kosovo was. And it's about 10 kilometers from the Romanian border. And that was important strategically in 1939. I'll talk about that later. Today, the village is Kosiv in western Ukraine. She was very fortunate to live in the Kresy because Poland was her country. The defeat Poland suffered at the hands of the Nazis and Soviets proclaimed the fourth partition of Poland in October 1939. The book goes into the history of Poland and how it happened that the perennial enemies of Poland invaded, both Germans and Soviets, and how the hatred among the ethnicities turned Poland into the bloodlands of the region. I wrote this book for myself, my children, and for my American countrymen who may not understand what happened before, during, and after the war in Poland. This story is unique and personal to me and my family, but not too dissimilar to all of your stories. This photo is of my beautiful mother, Stanisława Emilia Krasowska, taken sometime in the late 1930s when she was a very young woman. This book is a personal story of her love of country and love of family. Her dad, my grandfather, and she were arrested in April 1940 by the Soviets for belonging to a secret organization. The Soviets called the organization treasonous. The Polish subversives plotted on how to bring weapons back into Kosovo from Romania, which was neutral at the beginning of the war. The plan was to arm the Poles of Kosovo so they would take back their region. How big this operation was is unknown. After the invasion, Polish soldiers retreating to Romania had to give up their weapons at the border to gain sanctuary. Mom became a member of this organization as a courier, going back and forth between Kosovo and Koumia. She was able to travel freely because she had gone to boarding school in Koumia and knew people to visit, as well as being a declared domestic with the new Polish government in town. She would pick up and deliver sewing as she picked up and delivered papers. Her father was one of the leaders in Kosovo. They even held secret meetings at their home. Their activities led to their being followed by the NKVD, which eventually led to their entire network's arrest. Tu są listy. Mama trzymała ponad 100 listów.
Here are the letters. Mom has kept about 100 letters.
Letters and other material, photographs and memorabilia she kept. I dokumenty. This is Mom's sentencing document written in Russian. Some of the letters Mom saved were from family members trying to find and communicate with each other during and after the war. These letters were also to inform about the fate of family members, both hers and my dad's. These letters were found in Mom's attic when we were cleaning out her house before selling it. Because the letters were the foundation of the book, letters written by aunts, uncles, grandparents, and cousins, they tell stories which come alive when combined with the memories of stories I heard Mom tell while growing up. The book is written through my eyes growing up Polish in the United States. Okay. This is the rosary was made in prison. Beads were rolled from breadcrumbs, which survived for over 75 years. She received the cross from her father, and on that day, she received it was in late September 1940. And the reason for that was that it was the tribunal judge allowed all of the prisoners to speak to family members. And this was when her father gave her the cross. The bad part was that his teeth were pulled out during interrogations, and this is the last time she saw him alive. The reason for her arrest always intrigued me. Mom would always say that she and her father were arrested because they helped to smuggle soldiers out of the country following the fall of Poland, which they did. They would house these soldiers and keep them hidden until it was safe to transport them out of the country and into Romania, which was strategically located only 10 kilometers from the border. I always found it odd that they were arrested in April of 1940, 7 months after the fall of Poland. She never revealed the true nature of what they were really doing, conspiring against Mother Russia. I was able to get transcripts of her nighttime interrogations and trial through IPN, Instytut Pamięci Narodowej, or Institute of National Remembrance, which revealed the true nature of their activities. She and her father were Polish patriots fighting for Poland secretly and were sentenced to 8 and 10 years respectively for having to do hard labor. She was first imprisoned in Stanisławów, the capital of her voivodstvo. And then following their sentencing, she and her fellow women prisoners were taken to a prison in Kharkov, Ukraine, before being transported to a Soviet gulag somewhere in Siberia. The location of her gulag somewhere in Siberia has eluded me. I've been trying for years to find the whereabouts of her work camp. Even last night at dinner, someone from this group was giving me information about a possible website, and I looked, and she's not on there. She talked about crossing the Ural Mountains into Asia by train, is all I know. I would travel to that spot even today, even if there was nothing to actually see. I would love to experience the area. Because I don't know where she was in Siberia, what I do know is that following amnesty, the Russians gave she and her fellow prisoners each their travel documents, a new shirt, a jacket, a kilo of brown bread, and 20 rubles as they set out on foot to find the new Polish army somewhere in Uzbekistan. She never said how long the journey lasted or exactly how they found their way, but they did so by traveling south. One particular quote I remember, "What does a speck of dust," as she called herself, do in the middle of nowhere? They did make it to Bukhara, Uzbekistan, one of the collection areas. After arriving at the collection and recruitment site in Uzbekistan to join Anders' army, she succumbed to typhus, which many refugees did. The number of Poles who died from this disease was overwhelming. As a part of her treatment, she had to have her head shaved to rid the body of any lice, which caused the disease. As she said a few times during her voyage back to what was perceived to be humanity, because it was out of the gulag, you did not complain about your situation, she said. At least they were with their fellow countrymen, and they were all looking forward to being out from under Stalin's thumb. During that frightening time, she remembers the women, her fellow travelers and former fellow prisoners, as pieces of blue in an otherwise stormy and threatening sky, Mom put it. Mom was able to recover from her illness and went on to join the nursing corps, one of Anders' pesky units, which was the Women's Support Auxiliary for the Polish Second Corps. She was trained at the old Tehran airport after being transported out of the Soviet Union to be under British rule. You can see the date of the photograph, 1942. I have also circled her head on the photo. She is peeking out from a soldier's left shoulder. Mom's training then took her to her first assignment, the 3rd Field Hospital in Kisil Rabat, Iraq. The plot then thickens in the book on a personal level once she is at the 3rd Field Hospital. Mom took care of 6 soldiers, and she was encouraged by one of her patients to place an ad in the Polish Army newspaper that was printed in Baghdad in order to find her father, or at least find someone who knew anything about him. No information resulted about her father after the ad was placed. Someone she had met in February of 1939 in her hometown before the invasion finds her. Her old boyfriend answered the ad. He had gone from fighting the Soviets to being imprisoned by them, being then released and eventually joining Anders' army. This person became my father, Zdzisław Eugeniusz Serbinski. Letters such as this one, which is my mom kept for so many years, were from Dad's family. This particular postcard was from Dad's sister, Moja Ciocia, trying to locate him, which is why it has so many postmarks. His family was deported from Strychu in Stanisława Województwo na Kresy on April 12, 1940, and they were sent to Kustani, Kazakhstan. Ciocia's husband also fought in defense of Poland in September of 1939, and while a reservist fighting, he was captured by the Soviets, arrested, and sent to Starobielsk prison. Her husband's name is now forever memorialized on the wall of names at the Katyn Museum, Adam Smajewski, who was murdered by the Soviets. She and her parents never left Kazakhstan in 1941, following amnesty, because they thought he would contact her and they could travel south to Uzbekistan together. The last correspondence she received from her husband was a letter in April 1940 wishing her a happy anniversary. They were married in April 1938. After receiving the letter, the next day, she and her parents were deported, forced to leave their home in the middle of the night. For years, she did not know what really happened to him. My dad's training before the war was in light artillery, and he continued with this expertise with Anders' army. He was stationed in Kirkuk, Iraq. Mom and Dad tried to see each other as much as possible after they reconnected, and these are all Dad's leave requests, przepustki, which helped me to establish a timeline while tracking their movements. Also, many of the letters they wrote to each other were also saved and helped me shape their story. Some of the letters were very personal. I felt like a voyeur, just spying on them. Dad saying he'll quit drinking, and Mom saying, come back to me even if you are bald, because stress made him lose his hair. Reconnecting and dating led to their marriage on October 3rd, 1943, at a field hospital tent in Palestine. There are no photos of their wedding, but Mom kept the prayer book she received on her wedding day, and this is the belt she saved from the nursing uniform she wore. These are some of the medals and patches they both received, but Mom has more saved honors than Dad. In this collection, she has her dog tags and her Monte Cassino medal. Mom saved all of her patches and even the epaulets from her uniforms. Yeah, Dad fought in Monte Cassino, and Mom was a nurse on the front.
Widzisz te gruzy na szczycie, tam mrok twój się kryje jak szczur. Musicie, musicie, musicie za kark wziąć i strącić go z chmur. Poszli szaleni zażarci i poszli zabijać i mścić. I poszli jak zawsze uparci, jak zawsze za honor się bić. Czerwone maki na Monte Cassino zamiast rosy piły polską krew. Po tych makach szedł żołnierz i ginął, lecz od śmierci silniejszy był gniew. Przejdą lata i wieki przeminą, pozostaną ślady dawnych dni i wszystkie maki na Monte Cassino czerwieńsze będą, bo z polskiej zrosły krwi. Runęli przez ogień straceńcy, nie jeden z nich dostał i padł, jak ci z Samosiery szaleńcy, jak ci spod Rokitny sprzed lat. Runęli impetem szalonym i doszli i udał się szturm i sztandar swój biało-czerwony zatknęli na gruzach wśród chmur.
I'd like to take the opportunity to deviate a bit from my story, but shortly I will return to it. The National Memorial Arboretum was the British site of the first official war memorial in the UK, honoring the 500,000 Poles who fought under British command in the Second World War. The monument was sculpted by Robert Sobocinski and was unveiled on September 19, 2009, 70 years after the start of World War II. The statue was designed to depict typical members of the different branches of the Polish armed forces: the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and the Polish Underground Home Army. The airman is a Polish pilot from RAF 303 Squadron during the Battle of Britain. The Army was represented by a typical Polish soldier from the Battle of Monte Cassino. The sailor is a crew member from the Polish destroyer Błyskawica. And the underground figure is a woman courier wearing civilian clothes. The eagle at the top represents protection of all military with its outspread wings. Despite being the fourth largest Allied army in the fight against Germany, Poland's role in the Allies' ultimate victory was long overlooked. Polish veterans were profoundly shocked to discover young men in Britain asking whether Poland fought with Germany. To ensure the Polish contribution to Britain's war effort was never forgotten, a book, First to Fight, was published on the anniversary of the invasion, 70 years after the fact, and was edited by Dr. Marek Stella-Sawicki, Jarek Garlinski, and Stefan Mucha. Quote, "So many Polish veterans are no longer with us. They are dropping very fast. All we see are obituaries," said Dr. Stella-Sawicki, who was chair of the Polish War Memorial Committee. The book describes the functions of those who fought through personal accounts of surviving veterans. Lady Thatcher, former Prime Minister and patron of conservative Friends of Poland, said, "We must never forget Poland's unique contribution to Britain's freedom and the defeat of Nazi Germany. Her people showed extraordinary bravery, many giving their lives as the ultimate sacrifice. But the freedoms for which they fought were to be cruelly denied them in the post-war world." Back to my parents. Once the war was over, my parents did their fair share of travel in Italy. Anders' army stayed together and did not demobilize until a country would take them, since many soldiers knew they could not go back to Poland unless it was a free nation. Since my parents refused to go back, demobilization took them to England in the summer of 1946. The idea that the Western powers sold Poland out to Stalin could not have sat well for all who fought for a better life to be able to return to a free nation they called home. Mom and Dad were at a Polish army camp living together as man and wife for the first time in 1947, after 4 years of marriage. The book begins with Mom's stroke and then goes back to 1947, when she received letters from her favorite uncle, a priest who was rebuilding parishes in Śląsk after being repatriated to that area. He wrote to Mom in January of 1947 about the fate of her mother, his sister, during the war. Mom finally found out what happened to her mother back in Kosovo 3 years prior. This is the death certificate notice that Mom received from her uncle in 1947, announcing the death of her mother, Magdalena Wołoszczuk-Krasowska. She was killed on March 30th, 1944 by the Ukrainian nationalists, followers of Stepan Bandera. She never did find out what happened to her father, to whom she was very close. But deep down she knew The photo to the right shows my mother holding the walking stick sitting next to her father, surrounded by a few of her paternal extended family and her mother Magdalena in the pearls. Except for her father and mother, all the others survived the war. This was Mom's house in Kosovo, and the photo was taken of her cousin Ada standing in front of it in 1956, when Mom and Dad were already in the United States. Mom never wanted to go back to Poland for fear of being rearrested by the communist government. Also, the town was now in Ukraine. Ada and her brother and sister and their families were repatriated to Bytom and Opola in the west. Therefore, there was no incentive for Mom to go back. My dad's parents and sister left Kazakhstan in 1947 and were resettled in Gliwice. Their beginning in a new area took its toll, where they depended on the kindness of others. Because of health problems and having absolutely nothing, they relied heavily on what my parents could send them from England until they can get on their feet. My brother and I were born in England. Shortly thereafter, we began a new life in the United States. This transition of beginning yet again had to be terrifying, especially with two babies. Here are my parents in the 1970s. Mom lived with what I believe was PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder, because of those early years of the war. The memories of hunger and suffering at the hands of the Soviets, 2 prisons and a gulag took their toll. The road after amnesty was one of endless walking, train rides until the money ran out, hunger and thirst. Mom recounted how they drank water out of drainage ditches. Later in life, she was always in fear of getting turned around and lost while traveling. That fear took over all of her senses, and then panic set in. This same terror took over when she heard the Russian language being spoken, triggering those upsetting and irrational fears. This is how the decades after the war were for her, being haunted by memories from her past. There was no diagnosis of PTSD then, therefore no treatment. It always angered her. Why can't I cope, she asked. The book begins and ends with Mom having her stroke and eventually leads to my discovery of the letters. During her time following the stroke, I became her protector, moving her close to me. Letters from the Box in the Attic is a story told through my eyes, growing up Polish and what it meant to our family and what it means to me. After she died, I became the protector of all she saved for 70 years. I was able to unite with a Polish cousin, Eva. For the first time in October 2013 at Krakow Airport. After Mom's stroke, her dementia progressively increased to the point that there were days when she did not know I was her daughter. This was toward the end of her life. There was no asking her questions about her past. That time was gone. What I remembered, and through my research and with exploring her possessions, I was able to accumulate certain facts. With that came the opportunity to write letters to those family members in Poland who may or may not be alive. Fortunately, I found return envelopes at Mom's house with some old addresses, and this cousin responded to my letter, and I visited her almost every year since I began this project in 2012. My mother kept in touch with her before her stroke and after all of her aunts and uncles and first cousins had died. Eva's grandfather and my grandfather, Marcin, were brothers. The Kresovsky families were repatriated to Western Poland after the war. This is how I feel and have felt since I started this project. If I had only asked more specific and probing questions. So if you can sit down with family members and ask them about the history of your family, great thing. Here we are on the Oder River in Opole. That's my daughter that I brought to visit her Polish family. And last year, my husband actually joined me for this conference. This was Kosovo in 2013, during my first trip. I really wanted to visit Mom's hometown and find her childhood house, and my cousin was willing to take me into Ukraine, since she still has some family there from her mother's side. This is a side street in Kosovo, and what it looked like in 2013. The poverty I saw was hard for me to handle. In my imagination, the town was as if it was before Mom's birth in 1920. The only difference to me was that I saw modern automobiles on the road and satellite dishes on buildings. With the help of a local gentleman, I was able to find Mom's house. It was a joyful experience for me to find it, but it left me saddened at the same time, because it should have been Mom returning back to her hometown to find her home. This organization, the Kresy-Syberia Foundation, has been a tremendous help to me since I discovered it. The people involved gave me research resources. At the first conference I attended in 2014, I realized that my family was affected by so many aspects and consequences caused by the Soviet invasion in 1939. My dad and uncle fought in defense of Poland that September. My uncle was arrested and sent to Starobielsk. Dad was interned in Lithuania and later arrested by the Soviets. My mother worked for a secret underground organization, was arrested, sent to 2 prisons and a gulag. My uncle was murdered at Katyn. Dad's parents and sister were deported to Siberia. My grandmother was murdered by the Banderites in Kosovo. My dad and mother each found their way to join Anders' army, dad as a soldier, mom as a nurse. They were all affected by the cruelty and brutality of the Soviets, the hardships that their situation brought, along with the ultimate sacrifice, the death of family members, had to be overwhelming. All this brought my mom a lifetime of lingering and haunting memories. Those memories had a way of exposing the layers of grief and fear in her, as if she was the last man standing. In her large family before she died, all her aunts, uncles, and first cousins had all passed away. There was no connection to Poland except for the cousin I found. How ironic that from her large family, they all survived the war except for Mom's mother and father. She had felt an orphan for a very long time. Mom had an incredible love for Poland. As a young person and as an older one, she was a true Polish patriot. Me as a child growing up in a white Anglo-Saxon community in the United States, not living close to native speakers, I found it difficult to bond with my Polish heritage. Since writing Mom's story and traveling to Poland for these conferences and connecting to my small Polish family, I have found a link to my heritage and a tremendous sense of pride. After all my research to find out as much as I could about events which happened so long ago, I realized I was my mother's daughter. I too feel Polish pride. Attending the annual remembrance of the Soviet invasion here in Warsaw never gets old. It continues to be a moving experience, and I love it every time I attend. Moja matka żyła 89 lat.
My mother lived 80 years, and she would be proud that I try to speak Polish today.
By what happened to her so many decades earlier. It characterized who she became as a young adult into maturity. Those war years defined her even when she was an invalid. She would tell the nurses in the hospital and the nursing home that she was a Polish soldier, Polish nurse during the war. She was a very proud Polish woman from proud roots. Does anyone have any questions? And I do have some copies of my book available. Yes, sir.
Hi, Barbara. We were talking about
There we go. We were talking at lunch about the boxes. Why do you think they kept all that stuff?
It was such an influential time in her life. It was such a traumatic time in her life. It was a piece of her soul. And I think for anybody that feels that way when they experience it and then go on, they have to save it because it's a piece of them. That's how I viewed it. She's just a very nostalgic person. So maybe if you're not going to keep that stuff. But if you are, it's a part of your soul.
And I'm finding that very common. A number of people I talk to and on the Facebook group, I thought our grandmother was kind of a rarity where she buried all that stuff, but no, apparently
No,
not.
not at all.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Did your mother go back and reread the letters and
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. She would say that she was up fixing the attic. I knew better because all of the letters were out of order. I tried to put them in some chronological order, and then I would discover more. So I could see her up there reading and rereading that stuff and going through the memorabilia that she had saved and the photographs. Oh my gosh. But they weren't identified, so there were a lot of photographs that don't have anybody. I have no idea who they are.
we have the same? Yeah.
Yeah.
Dziękuję.
Jeszcze jakieś pytania?
Wykonała w zasadzie z notatek, ze wspomnień, prawda?
It's a great thing that you could create a whole story from those bits and pieces of history.
For a terrific presentation from the heart. I had a question for you.
Yes.
Two questions. The first question is, why did you write the book, and how has that changed you? I think you've mentioned that a little bit, but if you could maybe just sum that up. But then the second question, or is that my third, is have you presented this to other audiences, and who else have you presented this to, or do you want to present this to, and what reactions have you had?
Okay, I'll take the third one and I'll go back to the others. I have presented it to groups in the States, and because they are so naive about what really happened, they're just appalled by all the facts, all the details of what Polish citizens went through, what happened to them and why. From their perspective, it was just the Nazi invasion. They have no inkling of what the Soviets actually did because they changed sides. So that has been an eye-opener. And like I said, I wrote the book in a more simplistic manner because I wanted my fellow countrymen to understand and make the history portion of it not as compelling, or blended it more to the personal message. Okay, and I wrote the book because she had left me with these boxes, and I'm a sentimental soul myself. So I couldn't see just throwing them out or even donating them. I had to do something with them. And what more of an honor or tribute than to put something like this together for her, for him, my dad, and for our family.
Thank you very much. How much
That's
are the
it?
books?
Oh, depending on what your currency is, $17.95 for an an American dollar copy, €16. And I do have the złoty here. Hold on. I did the conversions. $70 złoty.
What were the reviews?
Yeah. Na Facebook, na Amazon są 5 gwiazdy. And those that like history, like I said, and they were all reviewed by fellow countrymen, were just astonished at the details, at the history portion of it. So I had 2 other independent reviews done, and they were also very favorable. Yes, Grace?
Sorry, we'll just do this for the translator.
I did read the book, and I just want to thank you for your honesty in writing it, because you did not scrimp on and try to hide things. You were out there with what they experienced, and sometimes that's hard to write about. And I am also one of the people that gave you 5 stars on Amazon because I loved it. And many of us read many books of this type, and this is probably my favorite right now because it's written from an American girl's point of view, an American girl who grew up in a Polish family that had a history that nobody in the United States understood. And that, to me, was like a grand connection with you. And again, I want to thank you for writing the book.
Thank you.
Jeśli nie ma więcej pytań, to proponuję...
There are no more questions, then I suggest we start a break. And the author of the film is supposed to get here at like 4:15. So let's start in half an hour.
Może autor będzie chciał coś więcej poopowiadać na początku.